What if the exact personality traits that got you promoted to the C-suite are the precise psychological triggers guaranteed to destroy your career?
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought, honestly.
Right. I mean, today we are looking at the dark side of the high achiever's brain. We are unpacking a highly curated stack of 5 essential books aimed squarely at high-performing leaders. And the mission today isn't to tell you that working 80 hours a week is bad for you.
Because if you're listening to this, you already know.
Exactly. You already know the tension of running on fumes while looking like you're, on top of the world. Today is really about understanding the hidden neurology of burnout and, more importantly, building a strategic toolkit to fundamentally rewire how you process pressure.
And that tension you mentioned, it's really the defining paradox of modern leadership. We see people building these incredible external empires while completely hollowing out their internal architecture.
Oh, wow. Hollowing out. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And the goal here is to deconstruct why that happens and provide advanced counterintuitive strategies for sustaining success. I mean, this is about learning how to maintain an elite level of output without using your own mental and physical health as the combustible fuel.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are hardwired to achieve, you naturally push yourself to go the distance. But we really need to figure out why that distance so often ends at a cliff edge. And to do that, we have to look at the internal wiring of a leader. We're drawing heavily here on Эрин Stafford's work, specifically the Type A trap.
Right.
And what becomes immediately clear in her book is that the classic Type A operating system is heavily, heavily incentivized by the corporate world.
Oh, it's heavily incentivized because it weaponizes anxiety into productivity.
Wait, weaponizes anxiety?
Yeah, think about it from the perspective of a board of directors. If you have a leader who naturally views every obstacle as an existential threat that must be aggressively dismantled, I mean, you're going to see massive short-term results.
Right, because they just won't stop.
Exactly. The Type A brain refuses to stall. It instantly calculates workarounds. It's relentless. But Stafford points out the biological cost of this. The Type A individual is essentially running their endocrine system on manual override.
Just flooded with stress hormones.
Yep, relying on constant spikes of cortisol and adrenaline to maintain that relentless pace.
And those chemicals, I mean, they're designed for short bursts of survival, right? Like running from a bear, not for a 5-year scaling phase of a tech startup.
Precisely. You simply cannot run an engine in the red zone indefinitely. The system begins to degrade. But the real problem isn't just the biological heat. It's the psychological destination. Which brings us to the concept of the moving goalpost.
Right, and this is where we weave in Jess Ekstrom's insights from Making It Without Losing It. She really dives into the psychology of delayed gratification. For a high achiever, delaying happiness feels like a badge of honor. You tell yourself, I'll take a breath when we hit 5 million in ARR, or I'll finally relax when the merger goes through.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
But Ekstrom points out a devastating flaw in this logic. The goalposts are always moving.
What's fascinating here is how this behavior actually hijacks the brain's dopamine reward system. Dopamine isn't just about feeling good when you achieve something. It's actually released in anticipation of a reward.
Okay, so it's like the chemical of pursuit.
Yes, exactly. But if you hit a massive goal and immediately move the goalpost without allowing your brain to actually process and celebrate the victory, you starve your system of that reward.
Oh, man. So you're just running on empty.
Yeah. You are constantly in a state of dopamine deficit. It's a self-consuming cycle. You defer your fulfillment for a tomorrow that structurally never arrives. Because the moment tomorrow becomes today, you just push the finish line out another year.
It's like you are sprinting a marathon, which is already a terrible idea on its face, but you're doing it, and every single time you get within 50 yards of the finish line, some guy in a suit steps out and moves the ribbon back another 3 miles.
That is exactly what it feels like.
And you just keep sprinting. But I have to push back on this premise a little bit. Why do we automatically assume that being a high achiever means we must delay our happiness? Like, is suffering a mandatory prerequisite for success, or is it just a really bad habit that we've collectively normalized in business culture?
It is entirely a bad habit, and a highly inefficient one at that. Ekstrom argues that we've confused enduring pain with generating value. She introduces this brilliant concept of the success fingerprint to combat this.
Break that down for us. What exactly is a success fingerprint in a practical sense?
So your success fingerprint is the specific, individualized set of metrics that actually give you a deep sense of fulfillment totally independent of arbitrary corporate milestone.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, you might have a chief technology officer whose success fingerprint is deeply rooted in, say, mentoring junior engineers and solving really complex architectural puzzles.
Right. The day-to-day work they actually love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if she is exclusively measuring her success by whether the company hits a quarterly revenue target, a metric that doesn't align with her fingerprint, she is going to feel entirely empty, even when she's incredibly wealthy and quote-unquote successful.
Because she's winning a game she doesn't actually care about playing.
Exactly. Identifying your success fingerprint means mapping out the daily operational behaviors that genuinely engage you and anchoring your sense of achievement to those, rather than a constantly shifting revenue target.
That makes so much sense.
And Ekstrom uses a lot of humor to highlight a very sobering reality. When we ignore our fingerprint and just blindly grind toward these moving goalposts in a stressed-out, hyper-driven state, we aren't even working efficiently. The suffering actually dulls the blade.
So we are essentially exhausting ourselves for diminishing returns. Okay, so if we know the Type A engine burns hot and the moving goalposts hijack our dopamine, how do we actually rewire our minds to stop the chaos? We need to move from just diagnosing the problem to providing the actual mechanism for change.
Right, and that requires us to look at the internal cognitive landscape, which Дэниел Чидиак breaks down beautifully in his book, Stop Letting Everything Affect You. He directly addresses the cognitive overload that leaders face.
Which is huge right now.
It is. When you are in that hyper-aroused Type A state, your brain is trying to control the uncontrollable. You are overthinking every email, every interaction, every minor market fluctuation.
Now, Chiddiak introduces a concept that, on the surface, sounds a bit jarring. He says a leader has to learn to distance themselves emotionally. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the moment I hear distance yourself emotionally, my brain instantly goes to the stereotypical cold, robotic corporate boss.
Oh, sure. The ruthless executive.
Yeah, the kind of leader who fires people over Zoom and doesn't even blink. So how do you distance yourself emotionally without your team thinking you've turned into a sociopath?
Well, it's a critical distinction. Emotional distance, at least in this context, doesn't mean a lack of empathy or care for your people. It requires a specific cognitive framing tool. You have to separate the operational fact from the emotional story.
Walk us through how that actually works on, like, a random Tuesday morning in the office.
Let's say your top-performing sales director suddenly walks in and resigns. The operational fact is you are losing a key employee, and you need to execute a transition plan and open a requisition for a new hire. That is the fact.
Okay, straightforward enough.
But the emotional story, however, is your brain immediately screaming, I am a terrible leader. The culture is toxic. The Q3 revenue is going to collapse. And the board is going to fire me.
Oh, I've definitely been there.
Right. We all do it. Chiddiak's method of emotional distancing means you manage the fact and you actively drop the story. You don't let every single operational hiccup destabilize your own internal peace.
I love that. It's like wearing an emotional hazmat suit. You know, you are still out there in the field. You are actively handling the toxic, highly stressful materials of leadership. You're doing the messy work, but you don't let those elements seep into your actual skin. You are protected inside the suit, so you can make rational decisions without being poisoned by the panic.
This raises an important question. How do you actually build that hazmat suit?
Right, because you can't just buy it off the rack.
Exactly. You don't just read a chapter on emotional distancing and suddenly possess an impenetrable psychological barrier. And this is where Scott Mautz's book, The Mentally Strong Leader, provides the architectural blueprint. Mautz argues that you have to apply specific behavioral options to promote self-preservation. You have to build mental muscle memory.
And emotional muscle memory works exactly like a physical callus, right?
Precisely. Think of a physical callus. It forms because of repeated friction over time, eventually creating a protective layer. Neurologically, it works the exact same way. When a trigger occurs, say, an urgent Slack message from a client at 11 p.m., your default Type A response is a cortisol spike and an immediate frantic reply.
Right, the heart rate jumps and you start typing.
Yeah. But Moose's behavioral option involves inserting a circuit breaker.
So instead of reacting, you consciously choose a new option. You read the message, you take a 90-second pause, you identify that it's an operational fact that can wait until 8 a.m., and you put the phone down.
Yes, and the first time you do that, it is going to feel agonizing.
Oh, for sure. You'll just stare at the ceiling all night.
Your brain will be screaming at you to fix the problem immediately. But every time you consciously choose not to panic, You build a microscopic layer of neurological friction between the trigger and your response. You reinforce a new neural pathway, do that 50 times, and you build a callus. The trigger simply can't penetrate your baseline of calm anymore. Mental strength becomes a natural reflex.
It's moving from a state of automatic reaction to a state of deliberate regulation. Okay, so we've mapped out the internal wiring. We've covered how to identify your success fingerprint to avoid dopamine deficits, and how to build an emotional callus by separating facts from stories. But now we have to look outward.
Because it doesn't just affect you.
Exactly. Burnout isn't just a solitary experience, it's a contagion. If a leader fails to regulate their own emotional chaos, it inevitably spills over.
Because leadership fundamentally does not happen in a vacuum. Your internal neurological state dictates your team's external reality. And Ryan Renteria tackles this with brutal clarity in his book, Lead Without Burnout. He explores the cascading systemic effects of a leader whose internal engine has finally run dry.
Renteria uses a very specific term for this, psychological withdrawal. When the leader burns out, they don't necessarily quit their job, they just withdraw psychologically.
Which is often far more damaging than if they just resigned.
Wait, really? More damage?
Oh, absolutely. When a leader goes into psychological withdrawal, the symptoms are incredibly palpable to the team. The leader stops casting a vision. Their emails become tense and terse. They start canceling weekly one-on-ones.
Just totally checking out.
Yeah, they stop debating ideas and just default to, fine, whatever you think is best, because they literally lack the cognitive bandwidth to care anymore.
So what does this all mean? It reminds me of a smartphone battery hitting 1%. When your phone drops to 1%, it goes into survival mode. It activates low power mode. It drastically dims the screen, and it forcefully shuts down all the background apps just to keep the core operating system alive.
That is a perfect analogy.
When a leader goes into psychological withdrawal, they go into low power mode, they dim their presence, they shut down their emotional availability, and suddenly the team is left completely in the dark, trying to navigate without any light from their leader.
And that low power mode is a direct recipe for organizational paralysis. When a team senses that their leader has checked out, they experience a mirror response in their own stress levels. Decision-making bottlenecks, communication breaks down, and your top performers. They start looking for the exit.
Because no one wants to work in the dark.
Exactly. Rentieri makes it clear that this isn't just a soft HR issue about employee morale. This withdrawal leads directly to bottom-line disasters.
But Renteria doesn't just diagnose the collateral damage. He offers practical solutions for scaling up a team in a measured way. And one of his focal points is the absolute necessity of celebrating small group milestones. Which, this brings us right back to Ekstrom's warning about delayed gratification.
Yeah, closing the dopamine loop.
But let me challenge this for a second. Let me push back hard on Renteria here. If a company is bleeding money or a department is deeply dysfunctional because the VP has been in low power mode for 6 months, is celebrating a small milestone really the answer? Like, is bringing in cupcakes on a Friday afternoon just putting a sprinkle-covered Band-Aid on a gaping arterial wound? Because honestly, that sounds insulting to a stressed-out team.
You're completely right. If it's just forced corporate cheerleading a pizza party to distract from a toxic culture, it is insulting and will actually accelerate the team's resentment. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Renteria isn't talking about cupcakes. He is talking about structural resets for the collective nervous system of the team.
A structural reset. Okay, explain how that differs from the Band-Aid.
Well, think back to the dopamine deficit we discussed earlier. A team burning out under a Type A leader is running on the same endless treadmill of moving goalposts. A structural reset means fundamentally interrupting that burnout pattern.
How do you do that in practice?
It means executing a major sprint for a product launch. And then, instead of immediately pivoting to the next impossible deadline the very next Monday, you mandate a pause. It might mean shutting down the office at noon on Friday. It might mean dedicating an entire week to low-stakes internal projects where the only goal is creative exploration, not revenue generation.
You are giving the team's nervous system actual, undeniable proof that the sprint is over.
Precisely. You are providing real-time evidence to the brain that progress has happened, allowing the dopamine to actually process. You are restoring energy rather than draining it. Addressing your Type A tendencies and building mental muscle memory isn't just a self-care luxury for a weekend retreat. It is a fundamental fiduciary duty to your team and your business.
Because if you don't mandate the pause, biology will eventually mandate it for you, usually in the form of a total collapse.
Exactly. Structural resets protect both the leader and the employees from marinating in a perpetually stressed out environment. It provides empirical proof to your own brain that you can achieve substantial growth without the baseline of panic.
It proves that you don't have to wait until you've run the entire marathon to feel good about the fact that you just ran a highly strategic, perfectly paced mile. You can acknowledge the mile, take a drink of water, and then decide how to run the next one.
And that strategic acknowledgement, that structural pause, is the literal fuel that prevents the engine from sparking, fraying, and running dry.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into these 5 sources, we need to synthesize the core takeaway for you, the listener. Succeeding at an elite level, reaching that absolute pinnacle of your industry, does not require you to tap yourself out physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The idea that you have to bleed to be great is a myth.
It is. The illusion that overwhelming suffering is the mandatory toll for success is exactly that, an illusion, and a highly unprofitable one.
By recognizing the biological limits of the Type A trap, by understanding your unique success fingerprint so you stop chasing moving goalposts, you take back control. You can use cognitive framing to build an emotional hazmat suit, developing that mental callus so every crisis doesn't spike your cortisol. And most importantly, by doing that heavy internal lifting, you protect your team from your own psychological withdrawal. You keep your battery charged, you stay out of low power mode, and you keep the lights on for the people relying on you.
And the ultimate, perhaps most radical reward of doing this work is that you actually get to experience and enjoy your accomplishments in the present tense, rather than feeling entirely hollowed out and destroyed by them.
You get to enjoy the empire you've built, rather than just being the ghost haunting its hallways.
That's beautifully said. But before we sign off, synthesizing these 5 distinct perspectives leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question. Something for you to ponder long after you take off your headphones today.
Lay it on us.
We've just unpacked a vast amount of literature dedicated entirely to helping leaders survive the psychological damage of their own jobs. If the standard definition of leadership is so inherently tied to constant, overwhelming distress that we literally require entire libraries of books just to survive the role, does the modern blueprint of the successful executive need to be completely dismantled and redesigned from the ground up, rather than just managed through better individual coping habits?